Hello, I'm going to be starting with excerpt number 1. So, for that, the first question is, which specific words and phrases are used to describe Europeans or Christians, and then which words are used to describe non-Christians? So, for Christians, it says things like, we grant you, or with our apostolic authority, which shows that Christians have some sort of authority or power over non-Christians to rule and conquer their lives. And then for non-Christians, they're described as pagans or enemies of Christ, and it says that they reduce their persons down to perpetual slavery. So non-Christians are not perceived as humans, but more as a threat to something, and something that they want to conquer. And then question 2 is, how does this language create a hierarchy between Europeans and indigenous or African peoples? What assumptions does it make about who is fully human? So for that, I said there's a clear distinction and showcase of hierarchy between Christians and indigenous or African people, or European and indigenous or African people. And so I said this because Christians are seen and treated as equal, while indigenous people are treated as property or goods that must be captured. So they're not seen as human. And then for the question, what specific actions does this language authorize European powers to take? I first said invade or vanquish, which is like take over of these indigenous people. And then I said perpetual slavery, which is reducing indigenous peoples just to slaves and capturing them as slaves. And then I said kingdoms or dominions, which is taking control of or taking power from these people. And then question number 4 is, how is religious language used to justify colonization and violence? What role does salvation or bringing them to faith play? So for that, I said religious language almost tries to take away any lack of morality or the idea that something is immoral since God approved of the act. So they're disguising these immoral acts as salvation or bringing the people to faith, but really what they're doing is wrong and immoral. And then for the final question, how does this relate to Charles and Rawls' discussion of dysfunctional theological imagination? I said, Charles and Rawls say that the theological imagination is wrong, and they are confusing Christianity with total land control and treating domination as being a disciple of God. They use God's authority to justify their actions of slavery and land theft. And then for part 2, which is connecting it to coloniality, I said, just like colonialism, they use perpetual slavery of humans. And now for excerpt number 2, it's going to be the exact same questions in the same order. So for question 1, I said to describe Christians, they use language like entrusted to him by God, showing superiority and trust. They also say things like justly and lawfully has acquired and possessed, or things like Catholic kings and princes, which again shows superiority over non-Christians. To describe non-Christians, they say things like savage or enemies of the Christian name, which shows how violently these people are perceived and that they are seen as the enemy and someone who should not be trusted. For question 2, I said this language creates a hierarchy by showing the clear divide between Europeans and indigenous or African people. Europeans hold the power to acquire, vanquish, and restrain those that they wish to, while indigenous people are those who are being restrained or vanquished or acquired. It is alluding to the fact that those who don't align with Christianity are not fully human and more so seen as objects or savages and something that they should be reprimanded for or captured for or anything like that. For question 3, the first phrase I said was vanquish them and their kingdoms and habitations, so defeat them and take their territory. Secondly, I said justly and lawfully had acquired and possessed, so taking their land. And then I said calling the indigenous people savages and restraining them, and then calling it self-defense. And then for question 4, I said they try and use religion as a way to reframe what they are doing as a positive thing. Basically, they are saying they're bringing them to faith and salvation as a way to cover up all the terrible things that they are doing to these people. And then for question 5, I said Charles and Raw explained that dysfunctional theological imagination mixes up following a religion and an empire. Many confuse domination with following a religion or a god. And then it connects to coloniality because of the religious hierarchy that is established. And finally, excerpt number 3, for question 1, I said that Christians are described as holy people who have a duty to lead people, which shows that they have been chosen or granted a specific spiritual responsibility. While non-Christians are described as residents and inhabitants, they are not named because they are not seen as important, since they are not followers or believers of Christ. Their sole purpose is to be controlled or converted to Christianity. There's a clear hierarchy created by showing that Europeans are leaders, while indigenous people should be ruled by the leaders, by the Europeans. So being described as a full human is based upon whether or not they follow Christianity or not. And then for question 3, I said, when talking about land, they say give, grant, or assign, showing that they have some kind of control over it. And then I said they lead people to embrace Christianity, so they want to convert them. And then question 4, I said colonization is seen more as a Christ-centered mission rather than a political venture or something like that. They use conversion of indigenous peoples to moralize or rationalize the ruling that they are attempting over them. And then question 5, I said Charles and Ross show that dysfunctional theological imagination mixed Christianity with an all-controlling empire. This is shown through land theft and control, forced conversion to Christianity. They no longer see indigenous people as those living near them, but now as land to capture and people to convert. This is linked to coloniality because it shows European land theft and conversion of indigenous people as approved by God and necessary, which then erases indigenous culture. Thank you so much.